I thrive on processing it through my experience and my thought process and how am I going to deliver this to the world. I don't think it's original thought, but I think it's original experience. And so when I take these concepts, match them with my experience, put them together, that's when I can give back. And it's the reason coaches out there, if you are like I'm speaking specifically to coaches, if you ever stop your journey of your life and your growth, that's when your business is going to hit a ceiling, because my business continues to grow as I grow. If I don't grow, my business doesn't grow. So that's where I'll leave us.
Hey, you guys, welcome back. This is where I bring my friends on. I bring people that I love working with, that inspire me. We talk about thought leadership. We talk about home-based business. Sometimes we talk about all of the different things that really are about just owning the narrative and stepping into our best, right? Our best case scenario. And so I have my friend Carrie Campbell with me here today, and we almost, no joke, I'm not even going to lie to you, we almost just spent a bunch of time talking before we pushed record. So then we were like, oh wait, hang on, we got to save this for the podcast. So a lot has already happened.
5 minutes.
Know that, but we're about to get into some fun stuff as well. Before we do that, let me tell you who Carrie is if you don't already know. And if you don't already know, you are like in for the most massive treat ever, okay? So from the age of 4, Carrie vowed to change the world. I mean, come on, can't we just hard stop there? And she's been doing just that as an elite human performance coach and the creator of the Eliminate Your Limits Mindset program alongside her husband, Brian Grasso, who's also amazing. Carrie has been empowering everyone from NBA players to corporate executives and individuals overcoming trauma. So we're going to get into real life stuff here, guys. Carrie, thank you for coming on with me.
My pleasure. I can't believe we finally made it happen, because this has been a couple months in the making.
Listen, when you have busy entrepreneurs, anybody that's listening and you are an entrepreneur, have you ever had it happen where somebody's like, hey, you want to be on my podcast, and you love them and you're like, yes, I do want to be on your podcast. And then the day comes and you're like, oh, but I've got something else that's going on. And then you tell the person and the person's like, good, because I did too. And then so you keep doing that a couple times and then eventually it works and you end up actually coming together. And so that is today with Carrie and I.
And you know, it's crazy divine timing. I got to tell you, like,
Yeah.
you have no idea, right? Because we just moved into our new place. You should have seen me this morning on the phone with the internet provider, because I'm like, I got to get this internet going to get this podcast going, right? So I'm on the phone with him for like an hour and we finally get it going. But it's divine timing because of the reason we made this move and the catalyst of where I'm going, and the fact that this falls today, May 1st, the beginning of a new month, is just, it's ridiculous. I could talk for hours about that, but yes, I'm happy we're finally here.
I love it, lady. I love it. You know, something that I really enjoy about you, Carrie, in specific, is your ability to make complicated, what could be complicated, with the wrong person talking about it, make complicated mindset shifts very simple. And so where do you think that came from for you? Do you think that was a born with thing, or do you think that came with, you know, different stuff that you went through? Where do you think that came from?
First of all, I love that you're starting here, because it's part of my practice as a coach that is really important to me. And it's actually part of my challenge with the personal development industry. I think that with the personal development industry, we go to these events and these conferences and we talk about these big, lofty concepts, and very few people actually know how to put it into practicality. So I think and it's interesting because I just taught 2 weeks ago a lesson on developing the core values for your life, not your business, but core values for life. And one of my clients actually said to me, I can't believe how you took something so complex and made it so simple. So this is a little bit of a theme lately, which it's interesting that it's coming up today. I think it's twofold. So I do believe that, and I'm talking to you, so this is going to resonate with you. I do believe there's something that I was born with. It's, a divine gift that I was given to understand human beings and to understand what human beings need in order to take what they've been given and implement it. So there's definitely a part of that. But then the other side of it for me comes from, well, I mean, Brian, so my husband, who is very much philosophical and conceptual and stuff like that. When we put our system together, there's a lot of these big concepts that he would teach. And I remember thinking in the early days, these earrings are making me crazy. I got to take them off. They're jingling in my ears and they're going to jingle in the ears there. So he would have these big concepts. And I remember as we were talking through them, I'm like, okay, but we need to make that practical for people. Because one of the greatest gaps that I saw in the personal development industry was the fact that people weren't able to implement. And it's really great to talk about how do you choose happy and stay in the know and build your core values and have all these things, but it's absolutely useless information if we're not putting it into practical form. So when we created our process, the whole concept behind Eliminate Your Limits was, how do we take this complex reality of being a human being and the chaos that it is human, and it's so not simple and it's so not easy. How do we simplify the process? So for me, there's a part of it that I think is inborn. I see, and then, working for 10 years with kids with special needs, my whole process was intervention based and strategy based. So those 10 years gave me the, like, how do I take this now and make this practical for adults? For me, it's useless information if you can't put it into practice. And as human beings, we love to complicate the process.
Well, especially, I mean, when you come into the business world and then you add a dash of marketers into it, everything gets complicated, right?
Yes.
Because it's like, if only you had blah, blah, blah. When in reality, it's like you have everything you need.
Yes.
It's really about uncovering it and having a good mentor. And Carrie, I think you're an amazing
Thank you.
mentor in this capacity to be able to help people uncover their superpowers. And so I was in one of my one of the we're all in many masterminds, right? So I was in one of the mastermind calls today, and we were talking about superpowers, and I like to talk about super friends and that sort of thing. And what is your, because as people are listening right now, what I want for them to be mulling over for themselves is, what is my thing, right? And if I believed I already had a thing, which was my superpower, could there be more? I always want us to be thinking and digging deeper and seeing, like, is there more depth to what I bring? And then also, if I've never even thought about having a superpower, I wonder what that is for me. And so, Carrie, since you're so doggone good at this, what would you say to someone to help them sort of uncover what they may be carrying that they don't realize?
That is a really great question. And as you were giving that question, I started putting it into practical form in my head in 3 steps. No kidding. I'm like, okay, because that's a huge thing to unlayer, right? And especially right now in the last like 10 to 15 years, right? When it's all talk about your superpowers. And because as human beings, we have a tendency not to do the deep dive and really understand ourselves, we all end up somehow with the same superpower. And I don't think it's not really supposed to work that way, right? So I was thinking about my superpower as I would define it, as you were talking. So my superpower, and I would not have defined it this way probably 5 to 7 years ago. So it's interesting because you were just talking about like the evolution of your superpower, like this is your thing, but what more could it be? So I've always been a caregiver. I've always been a people person. I've always loved like unconditional love, unconditional support. Like I love to give. That is my I would have said love was my superpower 7 years ago. As a matter of fact, I think I said it. I did say that. But over the last couple of years, and this only comes with like true internal work. You can't go to a seminar on a weekend to find this answer. Like this comes after countless hours of self-reflection, journaling, introspection. My superpower now, the best way to define it was, I don't know how and I don't know why, but for some reason, I believe I was born understanding the human condition, understanding this thing called human beings, the matrix of us and how complex we are and how simple we are. And I can take most human beings, and I was actually just joking with this about the internet, with the internet guy this morning. You give me technology, I'm lost. You give me a human being in the most complex, chaotic situation, it's like a masterful art for me. So my ability to understand the human condition, I would say, is my absolute superpower, right? So that's like my identifier, right? But then I thought about it, like, how did I come to this? Okay. And it's interesting because there's two kind of what's going to present itself as polar opposites. So the first way that I know it's my superpower is, for me, it's effortless and I undercut it all the time. It is effortless and I undercut it all the time. So you listening to this right now, what comes so naturally to you that people kind of always acknowledge you for, but you kind of just like pshaw it and you're like, ah, it's no big deal. For me, it's effortless. I can't not understand human beings even if I try to. So there's an effortless side of it. It's something that if I'm not careful, I can easily undercut and not value for its entirety, right? But then on the complete opposite side of that, and I think this would be something interesting for people to analyze for themselves. The other side of me knowing it's my superpower is that if I'm not careful, it can also see me getting myself into trouble. And when I say getting myself into trouble, I mean getting myself into an overcompromised, overcompensating situation. I wrote an entire book called People Pleasing Almost Killed Me because that understanding of the human condition actually led me down a path of being too accepting, too tolerant, too compassionate, and I lost myself. And I think that often happens with people. Like, think about somebody who's really impact driven in business, right? If they're not careful, before they know it, they have no business because they've gone bankrupt, because they've been giving too much, right? And so I think it's this interesting duality. And when people are trying to identify it, so what comes effortlessly to you? What do you undercut? And then what if you're not careful, or historically has maybe actually put you in a rough situation and a bad situation, right? So I think with all strengths come weakness. And if we're not careful, our strengths can tip over into the side of weakness. And that's where I would use that example. So that's how I would encourage someone to get started with that.
I love that. That's when you, first of all, I started tearing up as you were talking, because it's so very real about it like tipping over into, with the people pleasing almost killed me. And then what's our gold kind of tipping over into the thing that can be an extreme pain point as well. For me in my own business, and I hope people as they're listening, I hope that you don't just listen because you're like, oh, this is going to be cool today. Like, I hope you actually, really allow this to sink in, but allow it to help you grow also, and listen to the stories and think, because I'm going to say this next story, not as a complaint, because I don't hang my hat on complaints. I hang my hat on growth, but listen to the next story as like, oh, I should make sure I don't do that, right? I'm not ever going to say something and just leave it there like I'm mad. But I did go through, not too long ago, a couple years ago at this point, I went through an entire year of my business kind of flatlining at its growth, right? Like, it was where it was, but it wasn't growing anymore. And so it flatlined. It didn't drop, but it flatlined in growth. And the reason that it did that is because I had somebody in my business that I was trying to provide them a role in my business just because they were my friend and because I liked them. Yeah. And so then everything in me trying to create income for them, I flatlined my own business. Yes. It was the craziest thing. And as I look back on it, I'm like, what a wild thing to do. But it's for those of us that are truly heart-centered and we love people and we want to serve, we can serve ourselves, like you said, Carrie, we can serve ourselves right out of a position.
100%.
And to be so like wise to be able to catch it as it's happening is so important. What are your thoughts on that? I know you kind of talked about it
Yeah,
already,
I
but did you
mean,
have
I
any
so
additional?
this is the thing. I think I'm 45. I haven't been able to catch it while it was happening until the last 3 years, right? Maybe the last 3 to 4 years, right? And so you're right. The key is to catch it while it's happening, right? And be, or even like just shortly after it's happened so you can re-regulate it. I like to like, for me,
Yeah.
I would put it into the language, if I'm looking at it as myself, I would put it into the language of like the difference between and as being in like a survival mode versus a thriving mode. When do I have to shift gears and be like, oh, wait, I need to shift out of this because this isn't working anymore? And, I think for me, look, if you know me, you do, your listeners don't. But, everything comes back to your self awareness and your journey of self. We live in a world where everybody's preaching. I read 100 books this year, and I'm like, big deal. How many pages did you write in your journal? How many pages did you reflect on yourself? I will write 20 pages in my journal for every half a page that I read in another book, because your book of self is the most valuable book you can get. So I think that when we're looking at catching it, what we have to really appreciate is the process to catching anything. So the
Yeah.
reality is in every journey we have this level of unconscious awareness, right? So if I won't break it down into like the whole process of skill development, but we don't know what we don't know. Unconscious incompetence, right? So I did not know, I had no idea I was a people pleaser. I was just like, I'm like this really awesome helper fixer. Like I used to coin myself, like I used to like Mother Teresa syndrome, I was proud of it. I gave so
Yeah.
wholly and so free of myself until like 10 years later, I was like, wow, that has seen me staying in abusive relationships, seeing me make choices and take actions that I wouldn't have taken for myself. For me, it saw me completely losing the ability to make decisions for myself because I did not know what I wanted. And like I had no idea. So I always encourage people, give yourself grace. Give yourself grace to understand that if you don't know, you don't know. But then once you know, that's a different ballgame, right? So unconscious incompetence implies you don't know what you don't know. Then we get to conscious competence. Okay, like now I know I'm a people pleaser. Now I know that this huge understanding of human condition, if I'm not careful, whoop, it can swoop into people pleasing. I've got to learn to get really good at catching that in the process. And sometimes what I've observed in my clients is we go through this phase where usually it works itself in reverse. We usually only realize we've done something that doesn't serve us after the fact, right? And that's when we're kind of like beating ourselves up and we're like, why did I do that, et cetera, et cetera. And then I always say, like, well, what's going to happen is you're going to catching it after is better than not catching it all. And eventually what you want to do is to catch it in the middle of it. So you're in the moment of doing something going like, I'm not supposed to be, I shouldn't be doing this right now. Why am I doing this right now? Be okay with that. Embrace it as a new level of awareness until eventually you catch yourself before it happens, right? And the only way to get there is, I mean, it's hours upon hours of a conversation, but the only way to get there is truly knowing yourself. Where are you driving from? And that comes back to the age old question, knowing yourself, which is one of those things in society we love to scratch the surface on. We don't really know ourselves. So you've got to be able to appreciate the process to get there, to be able to catch it when you're not in alignment with that superpower serving you versus it's not serving you.
Yeah, that is straight wisdom, you guys. If you need to, I don't know if you're driving in your car, what you're doing, later on, you're going to have to rewind that, listen to that again, play it back 5 or 6 times until you finally get it. If you're like, I don't really understand, keep listening a few times, let it sink in because that's solid. That is solid. So, Carrie, you work with like NBA players, you work with, executives. What would you say to somebody who maybe they're running their personal brand? The stuff that you're working with the NBA players and the executives and that sort of thing, I think people that are running personal brands or thought leadership brands or whatever, or just running a business from home, I think they might be interested to hear that the same stuff that the NBA people and the executives deal with is the same stuff that they're dealing with. Is that, would you say that?
100%. 100%. It's actually fascinating to me how much we differentiate ourselves from each other based on status or perceived status. So, I obviously have my NBA players, my corporate executives, that high level elite concierge service. But then I also run a program called the Unstoppable Woman Project, which is for every woman, right? Like my CEO is going to kill me because if I keep dropping my price on that, he's going to be like, you're done with this, right? But my mantra is no woman gets left behind for a reason. So I have people from all walks of life. And I always think it's really interesting when the people, and I don't even like using a hierarchy, but like the women who I work with who would define themselves as like, well, I'm just a stay-at-home mom on minimum wage, whatever about your NBA player. And I'm like, what you guys need to understand is the same process I run with them is the exact same process I run with you. That just because they have this status symbol at this level doesn't mean that they're not living a human existence. And that's what it comes down to. I love saying no one taught us how to human. No one taught us how to human. We went to school, we learned math, we learned history, we learned science, but there was no class that was like human 101, how to be a human being, how to deal with emotions, how to deal with, I would even argue, and I'm not trying to diminish anybody's situation, but I would even argue that people who are like living at that level of status probably have in some cases an even harder time because what they're living in is the public eye, right? So you don't go on social media and vent about this, that, and everything else when you're living in the public eye. They live very isolated lives. They live very because they hold a certain reputation. But I tell everybody same story, different details. Every single person that I've ever worked with has the same stories, just in different details, different specifics. And, I really wish we could break down that barrier between how people see themselves to really truly understand that really we're all just people trying to get along in this thing called life. That's it. That's all.
Yeah.
Nothing more to it.
Yeah. Seriously, really. And the more it's like they say new levels, new devils, right? The more
Oh my
the
gosh.
the the
I just heard that for the first time last week. And it's like my new favorite mantra.